Caitlin Huey-Burns and Philip Bump are here with me. Caitlin is a CBSN political contributor and a national political reporter for Real Clear Politics, and Philip is a national correspondent for The Washington Post. Good to see you.
Hello.
All right, lots to get to today. Let's start with House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy saying he's confident about having the votes. All week long, we've been hearing that Speaker Ryan would not put this bill to a vote if they weren't confident that they had the votes. How do you feel right now, Phil? Well, or how do you think they feel?
Well, clearly they feel confident. I mean, I think that they were embarrassed by what happened last time when they had to pull the vote. I honestly think that they wouldn't have put this thing forward unless they felt as though they had the votes. The way they got the votes, I think, is sort of fascinating. It's this sort of Frankenstein. It was already a Frankenstein. It's like you took Frankenstein and added 2 more arms and legs to it, right? I mean, there are a lot of valid concerns about how this thing was cobbled together, what it will do, that we don't know what the long-term implications of it are. There are all these things that are sort of floating around it, but they're moving forward. They've got the votes. They want to get something passed. This is their opportunity to do so. We'll see what happens.
Caitlin, I heard 2 things today during the press briefing with Sean Spicer. On one hand, there was the question as to whether or not this was the right thing to do, given that the Republicans had criticized the Obama administration for putting Obamacare into place very, very quickly, right? There was that famous quote from Nancy Pelosi, you got to pass it before you see what's in it. The retort from Sean Spicer was, look, we've known for 7 years as a party what we want to do to fix or to get rid of Obamacare. Where's the fine line between what the speaker is saying or what the press secretary is saying and what the reality is?
Well, what's really interesting is that Sean Spicer was asked in different kinds of forms, can you guarantee that this will protect those with pre-existing conditions? And he had varying responses to that. To one point he said, well, we don't know what the numbers are. We can't possibly know what the numbers are. Right. And that reflects that the Republicans are going to try and pass this thing without a report from the CBO, which they had required before, without this kind of 3-day rule that they had implemented to let legislation kind of soak in. They're heading back to a recess tomorrow night, want to get this through. It's clear the president really wants to check this off the list to be able to move on to other things. What's missing here, though, is the fact that even if this passes the House by even the slimmest of margins, it still faces a really uphill battle in the Senate. Senators don't really want to touch this thing. And so this is all to go to a vote on something that lots of lawmakers don't want to vote on anyway. So you have the struggle of putting your name to a vote on something, particularly when you're in the House and up for re-election next year, for something that may not pass. And what's been interesting to see is that the White House is very involved in this effort this go round, but they still haven't really, kind of campaigned to the public on the merits and substance of the bill. You're kind of taking away something from people with repeal. They haven't really explained what they're actually giving to people, and I think that's going to be a hard sell, particularly when the president is at like a 40% approval rating.
Yeah, if memory serves, Philip, and correct me if I'm wrong, President Obama barnstormed the country when he was trying to implement the Affordable Care Act, explaining to Americans why he was doing it, what was in it. We haven't really seen that from President Trump.
This isn't Trump's bill, right? I mean, Trump said, I want to repeal and replace Obamacare because it was politically useful for him to say so. There's this great picture. I'm just going to take a quick aside here. Great picture of Steve Bannon in his office, and on the wall behind him are all of his priorities.
I saw that.
And so
it's like a whiteboard.
Yeah, it's a whiteboard. He's got 14 things for immigration, all these different laws. In Obamacare, it says repeal and replace Obamacare. The Trump administration has not thought this through. This is Paul Ryan's bill. This is the House Republicans' bill. They don't really, I mean, I hate to say this, they don't really care about it. They just want to get this thing passed. I do think it's important, though, to go back to the point that was just made about money. Sean Spicer said, yes, there's no way we could possibly know how much it's going to cost. The math very quickly is this. $8 billion they're putting into this pool. AARP estimates that for people with pre-existing conditions, their premiums could go up to $26,000 a year. What that means is if you spread out $8 billion over the course of 5 years, we're talking about being able to cover about 63,000 people a year. And there are 54 million people in this country who have pre-existing conditions, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation. That's the math gap. That's why they want to move this thing forward, because they don't want those numbers assessed by an outside party.
And why even have the CBO if they don't want to wait around for the score? I mean, is that a silly question?
No, there's no answer to it. What do you say?
Yeah, exactly. So, as you pointed out, Caitlin, this faces a steep climb in the Senate. the calculus that Republican lawmakers on the House side are making is that this thing passes, but then what happens when they go back to their districts and they have to explain it to their constituents?
Well, it's like it's a really difficult thing for them. On one hand, they don't want to go back empty-handed because they've been returning to recess with really nothing to show for it. And on the other hand, you have a lot of these moderates who they've been trying to get on board. Those are the ones that actually have to really kind of worry about their reelection. The conservatives, especially in the House Freedom Caucus, have shown that they're not really that concerned about getting reelected. What are they going to get, a primary from the right? They're not all that concerned about it. In fact, they've been kind of emboldened in some ways by this process and how they've been able to really shape the health care bill. And there has been some kind of, trying to shift blame within the Republican conference already. And so it's going to be difficult for some of these more moderate members, I think, to go back and say, look, this is what we're providing for you. This is how it's going to change your life for the better. We haven't seen them really being able to answer those questions in town halls and such yet. They're going back for, I think, 11 days. And again, we only have, after that, when they come back, a few weeks, months until the August recess. Right. Still a lot of of items on the agenda not even touched.
All right, let's talk about FBI Director James Comey in front of the Senate today. That testimony, there was a moment that blew up my Twitter feed when I just verbatim quoted what was being said, which was when Senator Lindsey Graham asked the director if the Russian government is still interfering in American politics, and Director Comey just with one word said yes. A couple of days ago, the president to our John Dickerson suggested that maybe it's Russia, but maybe it's China. Director Comey didn't say that. I mean, so that's pretty worrisome.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely worrisome. I mean, I think it's
because we have an election, as you just there's elections coming up.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think there are a few things to keep in mind. The first is that we now have a sense of what this thing looks like, right? I mean, we saw weird stuff happening over the course of 2016. We're able now, based on these intelligence reports, to sort of figure out, okay, this is why all these John Podesta emails came, or I guess the DNC emails came out of the ones we know were actually from Russia. This is why this odd thing is happening. It's a new internet age, yada, yada, yada. We know what to look for, right? It's also the case that the effects of what happened with Russia aren't really all that clear. It's not clear the extent to which, for example, the DNC hack really affected the outcome of the election. It certainly wasn't helpful to Hillary Clinton. She had a lot of other things that weren't very helpful for her either. In terms of the contrast between what was being said by Comey and Donald Trump, I think that sort of answers itself.
Was Hillary Clinton, she got a lot of criticism from those on the right, Caitlin, after her comments last night, where she was asked what went wrong, and she pointed to Director Comey's letter. She pointed to the fact that the Russians were meddling in the election. She did also say that she bears some responsibility. She said that she was going to be more forthcoming about that in her upcoming book. Was the criticism fair that she wasn't looking inward enough to some of the mistakes that she made on her campaign, or did she have a point?
Well, I think you have to compare what she's been saying about Comey and Russians interfering and the outcome of the Comey letters' impact on the election, and compare that to what Democrats who have been involved in this soul-searching process in the party, what they've been saying, which is we should have been campaigning harder in these Rust Belt areas where we used to attract votes. Why are we losing those votes? The Democratic National Committee, during their kind of process in which they were trying to find a new chairperson, really kind of talk to those issues. Some Democrats I've been talking to say, look, we don't want our party to just blame everything on this Comey letter. We actually have a lot of work to do in terms of rebuilding this party. And there is some concern about focusing too much on that and not being able to see the bigger picture here. What's interesting, though, about the president kind of going after Comey is it raises questions which were raised in this hearing today. Does he have faith in his FBI director? And Sean Spicer said today, yes, he does. What the president is tweeting, what he's said before in the past, doesn't really align with that.
Right, and there was another moment, and it hasn't really been picked up a lot, at least not on television. But there were questions directed to Director Comey about campaign surrogates for President Trump during the campaign that said things like, I've got sources at the FBI talking to me, specifically Rudy Giuliani. He was asked about that, and he was also asked, are you investigating FBI agents and have they perhaps leaked information to members of the press? And he said he doesn't know, but they're looking into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing that all this sort of wraps back into is that FBI investigations do not happen at the pace that matches up with social media, right?
Or politics.
I mean, politics, slow as politics is, it doesn't even match with that. That's absolutely true. So we'll see down the road with this sort of thing. You know, I mean, it is sort of interesting from the standpoint of Comey warning about 2018. You know, that may suggest that they may not have final answers by 2018 even. But we'll see. We don't know the answers to those questions yet. Obviously, everyone's champing at the bit to learn them, but we don't have much we can do.
Was it surprising at all, Caitlin, that the majority of questions with regards to Russian meddling in the election came from Democrats?
Well, no, it's not surprising. And we saw this on the House side when the House Intelligence Committee had Comey come in. It was kind of like a tale of two hearings at some points. And so certainly this has become a partisan issue. But you do have a lot of Republicans who are, of course, very concerned about Russian meddling. You mentioned Lindsey Graham talking about Russia as a really intense threat. The problem, though, I think for some people, especially Democrats who want to get this point across, is coming off as nonpartisan, right? Coming off as, look, this is an issue that Americans should care about. And I think it's one of those issues, you know, I've compared it to kind of a homeland scenario where you have to kind of map out everything that happened. It's becoming a little bit more accessible, but I still think it's difficult for people to understand, particularly since you can't, as Philip mentioned, point to exactly what the influence was. So kind of getting the public interested in this and maintaining that interest, I think, is difficult. It's
a good point that Democrats can't focus too much on Comey and the letter and the Russian meddling as the rationale for why they've lost so many seats, why Hillary Clinton lost the election. Is it true, does your reporting bear out that, as you've seen perhaps in some outlets, that Democrats are out of touch with the American people? Because when some of these Republican lawmakers go back to their districts, you see people going to their town halls and protesting. Does that look out of touch? I'm asking because I don't know. You guys are the ones reporting.
Well, the Washington Post, I believe, had a poll that showed that a significant amount, I think, 60% of Americans said that Democrats were out of touch. The amount of Democrats who said that Democrats were out of touch was higher than the amount of Republicans who said they were out of touch.
So they have a problem.
They have a problem. And, you know, I've been talking to Democrats in places like Indiana, West Virginia, other places, and they say the party brand is very damaged in their states. You know, particularly when you're looking at senators up for re-election, we talk about those 10 Democrats up for re-election in states that Trump won. A lot of them are kind of the Democrats' last best chance to hold on to those seats in those states. So it's very difficult when you're looking at legislation. However, it's been also interesting to watch Democrats who have crossed over to support Republican legislation, anything by this president. There aren't many of them. Joe Manchin kind of stands out as the person, and that shows kind of the toxic, perhaps, nature of this presidency so far. We'll see if that changes.
I would just note that the last time we saw a political party being torn apart by its base who thought it wasn't being ideological enough was 2009 and 2010 with the Tea Party. And what happened in 2010 is the Republicans ran the table. In 2014, the Republicans ran the table. There certainly is recent precedent for a very, very energized Democratic base, which hates the Democratic Party, but still goes out and actually does good over the long term for the party. Republicans and Democrats are very different. We'll see if that actually holds up.
Yeah, it would be very interesting. All right, let me get to this executive order. This is the president's first major policy step on religious liberty. So for a president who measures success on the number of orders he signs, what role does this one fulfill?
Well, this one, so there's been a lot of good reporting recently, particularly Politico, detailing the ways in which social conservatives are extremely happy with what Donald Trump has done in his presidency so far, and with cause. This is a core issue for evangelical Christians in this country. It provides there was a draft of this that leaked in February. Apparently, the new version's coming out is so much softer than this. But that one essentially allowed people who had objections to same-sex marriage, to abortion, to things like Planned Parenthood and contraception. It allowed them to essentially withhold services. It's sort of the ideal. People call it a religious liberty law, but it really is about people being able to act on their religious imperative, and that itself is problematic for a couple of reasons. The first is that if the one tomorrow looks anything like this, the question is, does this technically you have to meet a burden? You have to be burdened. Your religious beliefs have to be burdened in order to act against a law according to the existing law. Just saying you don't like it isn't necessarily going to be a burden. And then secondarily, what was carved out in that initial February draft were things that were very specific to evangelical Christianity. And then that raises the question of whether or not that violates the Establishment Clause. So the government shall establish, shall make no law establishing regarding religion. I forgot the exact wording right now, but since it's so specific to one religious group, the question is whether or not that violates the Constitution.
All right, we'll have to see what happens. That is expected to be signed tomorrow. Let's get to one final thing on the international affairs. President Trump, he stood today with the Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas at the White House on Wednesday. He said he was getting confident about the Israelis and Palestinians. He suggested that he could solve it, whereas others had failed. We have a little bit of sound. Let's play that.
Well, I think the man is different. You look at what the president's diplomacy style is paying dividends, whether it's getting someone who is held for years in Egypt released, whether it's the action that China's taken. The relationships and the foundation that the president is rebuilding are going to pay huge dividends for this country in terms of our economic interests, our national security interests. But this president's style is one to develop a personal bond with individuals.
All right, so Sean Spicer there talking about why the president may be able to get this done. Any student of history, if you go back and look at how difficult it was to get Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat to sign an accord between Egypt and Israel, the Oslo Accords, which there have been tomes written about like the difficulties, and ultimately they weren't able to get it done. Philip, how do you see this?
I mean, I don't want to be uncharitable, honestly, but it is one of the trickiest issues in the history of the world.
Of the world,
right?
Yeah. I mean, of the modern world, for
Donald
sure.
Trump's having trouble passing a bill with Republican control of the Capitol Hill, right? I mean, look, earlier this week there was a report, John Meacham, saying that Donald Trump asked him at one point in recent past why they didn't just negotiate their way out of the Civil War. Donald Trump overestimates his ability to negotiate. This is case in point.
Kaylin?
Who knew diplomacy could be this complicated, I think, is something that we're going to hear.
Yeah.
I agree with your premise, which is if someone can figure it out, great. I don't think anybody is opposed to that, of course. The question, though, is, this is a president who has shown how much he has been learning about issues that people have known about for a long time. He's learning about them in the spot. Fine, presidents evolve and they change and they adapt to the office, but he's also been learning about things that people have already kind of known to be true. On the same time, though, he is, as Sean Spicer said, he met with the president of Egypt, for example, or the leader of Egypt, for example, ended up, getting an American to return home. We still don't really know what that deal involved. So he's having these relationships, but we're not really sure the extent and the depth of them. And so it's one thing for the president to say, look, this is great. You talk to some of his allies and advisors, and or close people close to him who say, look, he looks at this as he did in business terms. And nobody else could make a deal, but I can make this deal. And so, that is obviously a difficult challenge. And we'll wait to see kind of what these relationships turn out to be. We haven't really seen the fruit of them come out yet. Right?
I mean, look, right, exactly. But just the fact that the president on the campaign trail and recently has said that he would make Jerusalem the capital of the state of Israel, that in itself is problematic for a lot of reasons, and for diplomatic reasons that we won't go into here. But it just sort of seems that if you're going to make a statement like that, you may not really understand the nuances of what is happening in the region.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as Caitlin said, he has repeatedly made commitments on issues that he then later admitted he didn't know what he was really talking about. I mean, he even recently essentially said this job is a lot harder. He didn't. The presidency itself, he sort of made a similar claim on it. It is absolutely the case that it is possible that he could develop a plan for peace in the Middle East.
And as you said, everybody here in this country and in Israel and in the Palestinian territories would be happy to see that.
There's no indication that he'll be able to do it.
And there's no real indication what his policy is. Remember when the president of Israel was visiting, he was asked about a one or two state solution. He said it could be one state, it could be two states.
Right.
Saying that right in front of the president of Israel not that long ago. So it's really hard to find where he actually is on these issues.
Well, he did say that Jared Kushner, if somebody couldn't get it done, it would be Jared. So we'll see what happens. All right, Caitlin, Huey-Burns, and Philip Bump, as always, we appreciate the time.